Now in verse 14, Reuben at this point is about 5 or 6 years old. And we're told in verse 14, now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. Now mandrakes were a fruit that grows in the Middle East, and people superstitiously believed that they provided fertility for a woman. And so Reuben, 5 or 6 years old, he's just out in the fields playing. He comes in with a bunch of mandrakes. Rachel sees the mandrakes and says, give me some of your son's mandrakes, which just shows how desperate she is at this point to have a child. She's the only woman in the household at this point that has not had a child. So she's willing to try anything. Give me some of those mandrakes. Verse 15, look at verse 15. And Leah said to Rachel, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? There's nothing like two sisters fighting, right? I mean, it just gets petty, doesn't it? You're going to take my son's mandrakes? And Rachel, she took my brush. I had 5 sisters growing up. She went in my room and touched my stuff. It's that kind of thing. And Rachel said, therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. Rachel makes a deal with Leah. Rachel gets the mandrakes. Leah gets the man for the night. And when Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. So Jacob comes home from work, and Leah, his wife, is waiting for him in the driveway. And she says, you're sleeping with me tonight. I hired you with my son's mandrakes. And notice Jacob doesn't say, what are you talking about? What do you mean you hired me with your son's mandrakes? You think you can just hire me for the night? Do I look like a robot to you? I can just flip a switch and turn it on? Jacob just goes right along with it, doesn't he? Right? I mean, he's got 4 women fighting over him, and he's the one who's making out in this whole deal here. He comes home from work, his wife's waiting for him in the driveway. You're sleeping with me tonight. All right, okie dokie. Verse 17. And God listened to Leah. Notice, Leah conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. And Leah said, God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. Notice, Leah conceived, not Rachel, even though Rachel had the magical mandrakes. The mandrakes didn't work. God is the author of life. Not some superstitious trick. Not some magical mandrakes. So Leah gives birth to another son, and she named him Issachar, which means wages. Verse 19, then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Leah is back on trying to get her husband to love her. Notice she says, now my husband will dwell with me. They lived in tents. They would have multiple tents. And apparently Jacob lived with Rachel. He loved Rachel. He wanted to marry Rachel. So he's living in a tent with Rachel, and Leah lives in a separate tent, and now Leah is hopeful Jacob will move in with her in her tent because she's had 6 sons. And so she names her son Zebulun, which means dwelling. Now he'll dwell with me because I've borne him 6 sons. Certainly this is going to change his heart. Afterward, she bore a daughter called her name Dinah. And we'll talk more about Dinah in a later chapter. Verse 22, watch what happens now. Then God remembered Rachel. And God listened to her, and God opened her womb. Now, at this point, it's been several years that she has been trying to have a child. And finally, after many years, she has a son. And she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And so she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. Rachel finally has a son. Her reproach has been taken away after many years of trying. But notice here, she names the son Joseph. And Joseph, right, he's going to be a big part of the story later on in the book of Genesis. But she names him Joseph. She's been waiting for years to have a son. She finally has a son. And she names him Joseph, which means the Lord will add another son. She just had a son after all these years, and she names him, the Lord will give me another son. She's already thinking of the next child. And she is not taking time to appreciate the blessing that God just gave her in this child. You know, we can be so focused on the future or the next thing or when the pandemic's over and everything opens back up. And we can be looking ahead and miss the blessings God has given us today. We need to take time to stop and give thanks for what God is doing right now. Don't be so quick to wish for the next thing and miss this thing, whatever this thing is. And to be looking ahead and miss what God's doing now. And just a final couple comments about Leah as we close. Leah was trapped in an unwanted marriage. She has a husband who doesn't love her and doesn't really have a desire to be with her. However, Leah gives birth to 6 of the 12 sons of Jacob. 6 of the 12 tribes of Israel come from Leah. Half the nation comes from Leah. 2 of her sons are worth noting: Levi and Judah. From Levi will come the priesthood. From Judah will come the royal line through David. And so the priesthood and the royal line come from Leah, the 2 key institutions in the nation of Israel. And most importantly, Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, will come from Judah. Jesus Christ descends from Leah, from her unplanned, unwanted marriage that she's trapped in. God works all things together for good. And God can make beauty from ashes. It doesn't matter how messed up the situation is. God can make something beautiful from it.